The train coughed its way into the wind-cut town of Sable Rock, dragging iron breath across a land as dry and cracked as the tongue of a dying man. It was spring, though the desert didn't show it. Just a touch less cruel in the morning, a touch more cruel by noon. The station was a plank-built rectangle, leaning from years of dust storms, smoke, and neglect. No one had painted it since the war ended, whichever war mattered least at the time. Men stepped off with their hats low and their spines bent, seeking work or something uglier. Women, if they came at all, kept their heads down and their hands folded. But this one, she stepped off like the dirt hadn't earned her. Her name was Vera Kate, 26, educated, too quiet for a saloon girl, too clean for a grifter, too proud for a housemaid. She wore gray like a widow but had no ring, no trace of softness or sorrow. Only her eyes showed something still burning. She carried one small case and a satchel that bumped her hip when she walked. Her boots were stitched, not cobbled, but the soles were worn. No one noticed the thin metal tucked into her corset boning, or the papers lining the bottom of the satchel, letters, copies of receipts, newspaper clippings, and one photograph smoothed nearly flat with use. She'd come for him. Harold Eberly ran the town's general store, though he styled himself a businessman. He was 50, with money enough to be feared but not enough to be respected. He'd sent for a bride through an agency in Philadelphia, $4 for the notice, another $6 to filter responses. Vera had answered his ad with precision. She listed her sewing skills, her quiet disposition, her willingness to work. She mentioned reading only in the context of the Bible. She made herself small on paper. But the handwriting, looped and sure, had rankled something in him. He liked them simple. And Vera Kate, even on the page, smelled too much like intelligence. He'd replied with a refusal and no apology. She never wrote back. She just packed and bought the fare with the last money tied to her mother's name. She'd kept the original letter, though. A copy was tucked in her satchel now, creased and ragged, with a single ink mark across the top where Harold had written no. The first person to speak to her in Sable Rock was a boy no older than 10, slumped on the steps of the post office with a bloodied rag tied round his wrist. "You the new one." Vera turned her face to him. Her eyes were pale green, hard as frostbitten glass. Knew what? "Bride one for Mr. Eberly." She smiled, but not at him, not quite. He stared. "He don't like mouthy." "Neither do I." That afternoon, Vera took a room above the livery. It was hot and smelled of horse piss, but the window opened and the lock worked. She spent the next week moving through town like a woman with errands, not purpose. She visited the mercantile and stared too long at the coffee canisters. She asked the apothecary about stomach tonics and the prevalence of arsenic in rat poison. She helped Mrs. Hendrickson at the church with hymnals and got a feel for which names in town held weight. She sat with children under the cottonwood and asked questions about their daddies, especially the one who ran the store with the nice hat and bad back. Harold saw her on the 5th day. He came out from the back with a ledger in his hand and narrowed his eyes at the unfamiliar shape reading the signboard by the flour sacks. He was slower than she'd remembered. His photograph had been 5 years old, but not softer. Still thick in the neck and sharp around the mouth, like a man who barked orders to dogs the same way he did to women. "You buying something?" Vera turned. The expression on her face was the one she'd practiced 100 times, demure, uncertain, with just a glint of interest. "No," she said, "not yet." He squinted. "You staying long?" "A while." That night she rewrote her plan. She hadn't expected his memory to fade so fast. She'd feared recognition, even hoped for it, a flicker of shame when he saw her. But he didn't see her at all, not who she'd been, not who she was now. That was its own kind of insult. Harold drank coffee every morning at 6. His house, set behind the store, had a kitchen window facing the alley. The door was unlocked more often than not, and his housekeeper only came Tuesdays and Thursdays. On the 8th day, Vera left a small tin beneath his steps. Inside was a mixture of powdered sugar, chicory, and just enough arsenic to taste bitter but not kill. A test, a whisper, a warning. He drank it, grimaced, threw out the pot, never said a word. He wouldn't die easy. That was all right. She wasn't here for easy. The desert was patient, so was Vera Kate. The morning after Harold drank the test dose, Vera took the long walk to the dry creek bed west of town. It was empty but for the bones of something once strong, deer, maybe, or wild horse. She knelt in the dust beside the remains, brushing away the brittle topsoil to feel what still held shape underneath. The ribs crumbled, the spine did not. Back in town, the church bells rang noon. Someone had died, though no one important enough for black bunting. Vera didn't ask. She made herself busy with sewing repairs, trading fine needlework for gossip and patience. She listened, absorbed. People trusted her more than they feared her. The fine edge of her education she kept hidden under plain skirts and the way she let men explain things she already knew. Harold had a nephew, Edwin, young and sweaty-palmed, who watched her like a rabbit watches a shadow. He worked the register most days now. Harold's knees had gone bad, and he didn't like standing too long. Vera learned Edwin lived behind the store in a room even smaller than Harold's own. She paid a schoolgirl 2 cents to draw her a picture of the back layout. It was crude, but useful. The next attempt came on a Sunday. She wore her hair in a braid, tucked under a calico bonnet, and walked into the store just before close. Edwin flinched at the bell. "I'm looking for chamomile," she said. "We don't carry teas," he said, scratching at his neck. "Then chicory." He gestured. She didn't go to it. "I heard Mr. Eberly knows his coffee. Perhaps he could help me find a blend." Harold was in the back office, writing something in a crooked ledger. He looked up with a frown that soured further when he saw her. "I've been thinking," Vera said. "It's strange, isn't it, that you'd send for a bride, then change your mind without meeting her?" He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Is that what this is about?" "I suppose I'm just curious," she said. "You never even signed your name to the letter. Just no, like I wasn't worth the ink." "You were." A long silence stretched between them. The flame in her flickered blue and cold. "You look different now," he added. "Could be you were pretty once." "I'm not here for pretty," she said. He smirked. "Good, neither am I." She left with the chicory, knowing it'd be another few weeks before she could try again. He was suspicious now, rightfully so. He asked Edwin to start tasting the coffee before he drank it, and Edwin, poor fool, obeyed. Vera turned her attention elsewhere. She helped the doctor's wife stitch a shroud for the dead child. A fever had taken her, unrelated to anything Vera had done, but the act of sewing the last garment a child would ever wear quieted something restless inside her. She remembered her sister then, the youngest. Long hair, gold as a church bell, dead before her 12th year. Drowned under a wheel well in Tennessee when Harold came through town in a coach in a hurry. He hadn't looked, he hadn't stopped. No one knew he'd been there, but Vera did. She kept the passenger manifest from the depot. She buried the memory under prayer and the small grave it belonged to, then she rose again. By the 4th week, the townsfolk started calling her Miss Kate with a mixture of deference and wariness. She had a way of looking at you that made you forget your lies. She could smooth talk from a drunk and silence from a preacher. And she worked like she had nothing else to do but sew and wait. Harold noticed. Men like him didn't like being forgotten. He invited her for dinner. "I've seen you about," he said, as if it hadn't been deliberate. "You got family." "No." "You're not married." "No." He nodded like that was a kind of asset. "I thought maybe I was too hasty," he said. "I didn't want a woman too clever, makes a man feel watched." "You should feel watched," she said, and smiled before he could ask why. They ate a roast he didn't cook and drank coffee she offered to pour. He waved her off. "Edwin'll do it." Edwin didn't. He was down in the cellar looking for wine Harold didn't need. Vera stood alone in the kitchen, her hand tight around the tiny folded wax packet. She hesitated, then slid it into the sugar bowl instead. A week passed, nothing. 2 weeks, still nothing. Until the housekeeper took sick. Violent stomach cramps, dizziness, sweating and then shivering. Vera visited, brought her soup, and sat beside the bed until the worst had passed. She asked the woman to describe everything she'd eaten the day before. There was only one thing she hadn't shared with anyone else. "Mr. Eberly likes sugar on his toast," the woman said. "I used the last of what he keeps in the blue tin." Vera left the house before her smile could show. It wasn't just about killing him anymore. It was about precision. It was about balance. He had to die by her hands but never see the strings she pulled. He had to feel the sickness coming on slow. He had to second-guess himself. It had to look like age or sin or something earned. She started talking to the town's undertaker. "You can learn a lot from a body," she said. He agreed. By the 6th week, Harold began to shake. His appetite wavered. He lost interest in inventory, then in walking. Edwin kept things running, but the boy was no businessman. Rumors began to spread, consumption, maybe, or the late stages of a buried illness. Some whispered about cursed land. A few thought it was syphilis. Vera said nothing. At night she lay in her room above the livery, listening to the horses stir and the wind scrape the roof like bone fingers across slate. She studied poisons with the quiet obsession of a scholar: belladonna, arsenic, strychnine. She learned how to dose slow, how to let the body rot in pieces. She traced every pain in Harold's belly back to her choices. Still, she kept her skirts clean and her posture upright. She visited the store less, always through Edwin, always with small talk and smaller smiles. Harold didn't ask for her anymore. He stopped drinking coffee on the 8th week. She waited. She waited because some men die too quick, and some women aren't made for quick things. By the 9th week, Harold Eberly had stopped leaving his house. No one said the word dying, but the silence around it had its own shape. Vera watched from a distance, her presence becoming a constant on the town's periphery, at the well, on the church steps, behind the pews. Always near enough to see the tide change, but never close enough to be named as part of it. She didn't need to be near him anymore. The damage was in motion. Still, something in her stayed restless. He wasn't dying the way she'd imagined. No gasping confession, no fear in his eyes, just a slow withdrawal like a man fading into the seams of his own cowardice. His color dulled, his hands trembled, his house began to stink of piss and neglect. Vera waited. Then the storm came. A real one, lightning over the ridge, wind that scoured flesh. Sable Rock hadn't had rain in months, and when it came, it brought more ruin than relief. 2 roofs tore off. A child drowned in the arroyo. The jail collapsed inward. And the store, Harold's store, took a lightning strike through the top corner, blowing out glass and scorching the storeroom to black. He was inside when it happened. They pulled him out, coughing and bloody, clothes half-scorched from where he'd been trying to lift his safe. He hadn't been sleeping in the house anymore. He was keeping watch on the store, on something he thought might be stealing from him. The fire didn't kill him, but it took the last of his strength. He was carried out limp and left at the boarding house across from the church, too weak to stand. Vera didn't see it happen, but she saw the aftermath. She walked past his window at dusk, heard the wheeze of him begging someone to adjust the pillow. He stank of sickness. The nurse didn't answer right away. It was the first time Vera saw him as something less than human, not just weak, but small. There was no man left in that bed, only memory. She turned and walked away, not because she couldn't look, but because she didn't want to be seen there when he went. That night, Edwin knocked on her door. He looked wrecked, pale in the mouth, eyes gone dull. His hands wouldn't stop twitching. "I need help," he said. She let him in. He told her about the accounts, how the fire had revealed Harold's stash of debt slips, hidden ledgers, second books for the store. He'd been bleeding the town for years, charging double on credit, falsifying payments, threatening to expose men's wives if they didn't pay him back with favors. Edwin found letters, notes. One from the mayor's brother, another from a woman now buried with a stillborn child. It wasn't just greed. It was a pattern, a sickness. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't know what he was." Vera poured him tea, but didn't answer. He looked up. "Did you?" She nodded once. He didn't ask how. The next morning, Harold Eberly woke to the wrong face. Vera stood over him with a cloth in her hand. Not a nurse, not the housekeeper, just her. He tried to sit up, couldn't. She sat beside the bed like it was owed to her. "You'll be dead within a month," she said. "Less if I decide to help." He opened his mouth to speak, but only bile came out. "I used to think revenge had to be fast," she said. "A gun, a knife, blood for blood, but it doesn't, it just has to be right." His lips trembled. "Who?" She leaned closer. "You ran a girl over in Tennessee, small town, east side. Her name was Ruth. She died in the street. I was her sister." Harold stared at her, but there was nothing in his eyes. No flicker of recognition, no guilt, no apology. Only fear. You left town that night, she said. Paid off the depot, burned the record, but not all of it. I found your name, I followed it. I didn't mean. You didn't look. She stood. You poisoned me, he croaked. She nodded. But why wait? Because I wanted you to know the feeling, to feel everything rot from the inside out. He wept, it was dry and ugly. She left him there. Word spread by the end of the week. Not of her visit, Edwin kept that close, but of the documents, the letters, the 2 books that didn't match. The sheriff came. He didn't arrest Harold, there was no need. The man could barely piss in a bowl, but he took the ledgers and told the mayor. Sable Rock turned on Harold Eberly like a dog turns on its lame owner. Quietly, with relief. His debts were scrubbed from the board. A few of the men whose names appeared in his private files came forward, hesitantly, shame-faced. Women stopped speaking his name. The preacher rewrote his sermons with sharper warnings against sin. Vera did nothing. She was done with spectacle. In the nights that followed, she walked again to the dry creek bed west of town. This time she carried the photograph, Ruth's picture, edges soft from years, in a boot or pocket. She dug a shallow hole near the spine of the old bones and placed the photograph inside. Not a grave, not a shrine, just a mark. When she came back into town, her gait was different, not lighter, not faster, just more certain. She passed Harold's window and didn't look in. He died 3 days later, not from the poison alone. It was a stroke that finally took him, or maybe his heart gave out. No one said what really happened. No one mentioned the coffee. No one knew except Edwin, and he didn't talk. He just watched Vera pack her bag. She left the sewing kit with the widow Hendrickson and the ledger with the sheriff. Everything else she took with her. "You'll keep the store?" she asked Edwin. He nodded. "Run it honest. Do better than him." "I will." She looked him over. "He taught you to be afraid. You don't have to stay afraid." He looked down. "I'm still trying to learn that." She stepped into the morning light, boots tracing the spine of the street without pause. Behind her, the desert stretched wide and waiting. There was no farewell, no crowd to watch her go. Just the dust, the sun, and the ghost of a man who died not knowing the truth that killed him. Vera rode east with the sunrise behind her, horse borrowed from the livery in exchange for the last of her coin and a promise not to bring it back. The animal was gray with a darker mane, mule-blooded and slow, but steady on rough ground. She didn't name it. She didn't speak to it either. What she carried didn't allow for tenderness. Sable Rock shrank behind her like a wound closing over, slow and scarred. She didn't head for any place in particular, not at first. The road offered its own kind of silence. Sagebrush, carrion birds, occasional travelers who squinted at her as she passed, gauging her weight, her direction, her worth. She gave none of it freely. She carried her satchel tied close, now lighter, with only a change of dress, her sister's ribbon, and the small silver spoon she'd stolen from Harold's sideboard on the last day. Proof, maybe, or just something to bury when the world grew heavy again. In Ash Hollow, she slept under a burnt-out stagecoach and ate dried beans from a tin. In Randall's Crossing, she bought a new pair of gloves and left her old ones behind in a privy. Somewhere near Jasper's Ferry, a man followed her for 6 miles until she turned the horse and faced him straight on, rifle across her saddle. He left without speaking. She took odd work in a mining camp for a spell, mending shirts, heating bathwater, listening. Men spoke freely when they thought a woman was deaf to meaning. She collected stories like sharp stones. Each one told her where not to go, who not to trust. She wasn't waiting for the next Harold, but if he came, she'd know the shape of him. It was in a town called Bone Creek that she found the next thread. A woman at the trading post wore her hair the same way Ruth used to, tight braids looped over the ears. Vera stared longer than she meant to. The woman noticed. "You got kin buried near here?" she asked. "No," Vera said, "but I'm looking for someone." The woman raised a brow. "A man." "A girl once," Vera said. "Now just the trail she left behind." They stood quiet a moment. Then the woman said, "There's a church north of here. Burned out in 72. People say the preacher's wife hung herself after he ran off with a singer. Left a daughter behind. Smart girl. Too smart. No one's seen her since." Vera felt the air shift. The trail was calling again. That night she studied the map scrawled on butcher paper, thinking about the way Ruth had smiled before a lie, the way her fingers worked string into shapes. There were things Vera remembered only in fragments, the sound of laughter from behind a curtain, the smell of iron in their mother's hair. She'd thought revenge would bury the ache, but ache didn't live in the same place as hate. It had deeper rooms. She followed the story of the preacher's daughter. It took her north through farmland hollowed by drought, through towns where the church sat higher than the well, through a place called Fen Hollow where 3 girls had vanished the year after the war. She spoke to women who flinched when their names were called, to children who didn't speak at all, to men who smiled too much when they saw her hands were small and her eyes were tired. She took note of the names whispered in corners, the way some places stank of secrets. In one town, she found a ledger in a drawer beneath a rotting pulpit. Names, amounts, dots in red ink beside the girls who never came home. She waited until dark, lit the church with oil, and burned it down. When someone asked, she said lightning. No one argued. The sky was full of storms that summer. It was no longer just about Ruth. It was about the ones no one remembered. In Red Basin, she found another man like Harold. His name was Amos Kell. He ran a freight company and liked to hire young girls with quick hands. He called it charity. He called them strays. Vera watched him for a week, saw the way the girls never lasted longer than a season. She broke into his records at night, read letters stuffed behind a wall panel, found a hair ribbon still stained at one end. She didn't poison him. She slit his throat and left his body under the porch, with a note pinned to his chest in her own handwriting. You will not be remembered. Only the girls will. She didn't stay for the trial. She knew what they'd find and what they wouldn't. Word of her moved faster than she did after that. Some towns whispered about a woman in gray who brought fire to old sins. Others said she was a ghost, a vengeance spirit, the desert's own retribution. Girls who'd once been silent began to speak her name in private, fingers trembling with the hope that she might be real. They started calling her the widow with no ring. Vera heard it once in a saloon near Elk's Hollow. A man said it like a joke. She smiled and corrected him. She wears no ring because it was never given. That night she left a message carved into the door of the freight office in town. Every dead girl has a sister. And then she kept writing. She didn't pretend to be a savior. She didn't believe in justice the way the courts did. But the world was built on the backs of forgotten women, and Vera Kate was done letting them stay forgotten. She had no home, no land, no kin left to claim, but she had names, she had roots. She had the ability to vanish and return exactly where she was needed. By the winter of that year, she had 10 men's names folded in a lockbox beneath the floorboards of a mountain cabin she never stayed in twice. Some of them still lived. Some were already bones under sand. She marked each with a small symbol, a star for watched, a cross for dead, a fire for those who needed burning. Harold Eberly's name stayed at the top. Not because he was the worst, but because he was the first to teach her that even when you forget a girl's face, her silence will remember you. Snow came late to the flatlands that year, heavy and wet like the world was trying to bury itself. Vera rode through it with her collar up and rifle lashed tight to the saddle, no destination but movement. By now the horse had grown thin in the ribs, hooves chipping with each frozen mile, but it didn't quit, neither did she. She stopped in a settlement with no name, just a gas lamp hanging crooked outside the tavern and a bell tower missing its bell. There were 6 buildings and 9 people, 2 of them women, one of them afraid. Vera could read fear in a face like some men read trail signs. This girl, 16 maybe, had welts down the backs of her arms that someone had taught her to hide. She served stew without looking up and flinched when boots scraped the floor too loud. Vera waited until closing. She didn't speak until the girl was outside, dumping slop for pigs that didn't come anymore. "Who is he?" she asked. The girl didn't answer at first. Then, "My uncle. Is he your kin by blood?" "No," she said, voice tight, "by church." Vera's jaw set. She nodded once and turned away. She spent that night under the porch of the old schoolhouse, wrapped in a tarp that smelled of pine pitch and mold. The cold cut deep, but she'd lived through worse. She'd slept in rivers, woken to rats, buried herself under snow to hide from men with dogs. The body learned to bend. In the morning, she broke into the tavern while the uncle was out riding. She didn't go for his purse. She went for the ledger, the back room, the hidden drawer she guessed would be there, and was. Letters, a pink ribbon, a button that didn't belong to any shirt in the building. She left it all on the table in plain sight. Then she waited. The uncle came back in around midday. Vera didn't hide. He saw her, a stranger lean and still, hands tucked polite in her coat. His eyes narrowed. "You lost." "No," she said, "you are." The man went for his belt. Vera shot him through the leg, not quick, not clean, enough to ruin walking for a year. He howled and fell. She walked to him, cocked the rifle again. "You'll leave her," she said. "You'll leave this town, this territory, and never speak her name. If you do, I'll hear it." He whimpered, "You got no right." "I do," she said. "She was me, once." The girl came out with the stew ladle still in her hand. Her mouth trembled, but her eyes didn't. Vera looked at her. "Take his boots, take the coin he keeps sewn under the mattress, burn whatever's yours, and don't come back." The girl nodded. She didn't ask who Vera was. She didn't ask why. That night, Vera rode west. There was nothing waiting there. Just the long dark and the understanding that some journeys finish not in thunder, but in stillness. She found a shack built into the side of a bluff, abandoned but solid. She laid her rifle by the door and set a fire low in the hearth. She peeled off her gloves and stared at her hands. They were lined now, skin pale from wind, fingers stiff with old breaks. The work she'd done had carved itself into her bones. She thought of Ruth. She thought of the girls she'd saved, the ones she hadn't, the ones who'd never know her name but carried her vengeance in the way they learned to walk tall. She boiled water, made coffee from a tin she'd bartered for weeks ago. She didn't sweeten it. She drank slow. There would be no more names, no more writing. Her war was finished. What came after was none of her concern. In the morning, she rose with the sun, packed her satchel one last time, and buried the spoon beside the hearthstone. Not a grave, not a keepsake, just a mark. Outside, the wind howled like it was mourning something. But Vera Kate did not mourn. She rode into the mountains and was not seen again. And though Harold Eberly died not knowing she was the one who'd poisoned his coffee, the land remembered. The desert remembered. The women remembered. And that was enough. That was always enough.